Trump has said there are going to be mass deportations. Everyone in the country knows that he said that. I don't think it is news when he says that again. I don't think it's news when Homan says that again. So I don't think you need to say, Trump said today for the 433rd time that there are going to be mass deportations. I do think the key to covering this starting next week, when he becomes president again, is, are there actually going to be, by historical standards, mass deportations?
This is the Ground Game Podcast, where we cover politics from the ground up. Here are your hosts, Tom LoBianco and Patrick Pfingsten.
From sea to shining sea, above the fruited plain, this is the Ground Game Podcast. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. He's Tom LoBianco. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up on the show this time around, Dick Tofel, who is a legend in the journalism industry, founded ProPublica, and now writes on Substack. I'm sure he and I are going to debate about the future of legacy media, because he's a little more optimistic about it than I am. But I certainly think his thoughts are going to be really fun to hear. So, Tom, how you doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. How's it going?
We're hanging in there. We are 1 week away from Inauguration Day. I know you're on the periphery of DC. I don't know how often you get inside the Beltway at this point, but it feels like everybody's kind of getting on edge.
I'm downtown periodically. I will be there at the inauguration. I've got my ticket for 24site.news. So I will be there live and in person. Best reporting advice I ever got was the first inauguration I ever covered. Bobby Ehrlich, 2003 Maryland governor. I was sitting outside in like the teens Fahrenheit, freezing, with my multiple pens, none of which worked because ink freezes. And my old editor told me, she's like, bring a pencil.
Thankfully, in my state in Illinois, we do it we do it indoors.
Oh,
because we're not dumb.
I can't say the same. No.
As we're recording on the 13th, our old state Indiana is doing theirs indoors this time. They haven't always done.
Oh, really? Wow.
So, my friend in Indiana, soon to be former Governor Eric Holcomb, ceding power to Mike Braun in Indiana, who I fear will be a terrible governor.
Holcomb didn't attempt a status coup. He didn't say, the hell with it, I'm sticking around.
I'm going to put on my cowboy boots and trim my beard, and I'm going to keep power, baby.
No. I'm old enough to remember when Eric Holcomb was like the hardest right of the hardcore, and now he's considered a squish.
Well, that says a lot about where we stand in politics today, that he passed a $30 billion infrastructure bill, and people are mad because there was a gas tax increase, because apparently you don't fix roads if you're a conservative anymore.
I don't know, man. Sound like a lefty.
All right, Tom, let's get into it.
Do it.
First down.
All right, so as we record this on Monday the 13th, yesterday, Sunday the 12th, J.D. Vance was doing the rounds on the TV Sunday shows, and said that people who were violent and attacked police on January 6th were not going to get pardoned by Donald Trump. And then once the MAGAs threw a fit on the Twitter machine, and Trump heard about it, he totally backtracked. What should we expect from January 6th pardons?
Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you, the first, when I heard that, I had acid flashbacks to Mike Pence when he was starting out the administration the first time, the explainer in chief. I think it goes to show that you don't really know until Trump actually does it. Good question there of how much Vance is dialed in to this. Certainly, the joke now is, who is the real vice president, or who's the real president for that matter, because you still have Elon Musk in the wings. Sometimes not always just in the wings. I don't know. I suspect that's probably right what Vance said, because You don't
Is it?
want what you said. What's that?
Is it?
Yeah, because do you want this to be a whole thing? His initial thing about violent, like not pardoning violent offenders, you smash a cop's head into the marble steps and spray blood everywhere, you're probably going to jail for
But
that.
MAGAs think they're heroes. The red
They
hats
do.
think those people are heroes.
But 2/3 of America does not.
Trump thinks they don't give a damn about that. Trump thinks
does.
that they were fighting
Trump
for
does.
him, and that's all that matters.
Trump does.
They were all for Trump, and I think it shows just more of the same. That JD Vance is going to lie his ass off at every opportunity, and then when he has to backtrack to save face with the base, he's going to.
We're going to know in 1 week. We're going to know in 7 days, on noon, on January 20th, 12:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, a few minutes after that. I mean,
Yeah,
you can't sign the pardons until like he gets to the car or something, but probably that afternoon, right? If he's serious about doing it, he'll do it that afternoon.
Maybe the choir will be there at the inauguration.
Don't get me started. We'll have plenty on the inauguration coming up.
It's second down.
So on Tuesday, we start Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing for Secretary of Defense, a guy who's never been more than a captain or a sergeant in the National Guard, who thinks he's more qualified than the 4-star general that he'll replace. Dems it's interesting to see how Dems are going to handle this. I mean, certainly Republicans are going to protect the Trump nominee. Even Joni Ernst has seemed to capitulate so far on Hegseth, which makes no sense considering her background. How do Democrats play this?
Well, you guys, I mean, we're going to be watching those hearings starting here pretty soon. Pretty standard tactics. And I think we talked about this in the last episode a little bit about Tulsi Gabbard and the delay on starting her confirmations because of she hadn't provided the background briefing, among other very serious national security concerns around her. But you've seen some movement. There's kind of a standard movement here. Jim Lankford, Oklahoma, certainly no squish. Has said that he wanted some guarantees on Section 702, a national security issue, and she offered that up. So this is kind of the standard dance that we're seeing here. I do think that it's not going to go to neither side is going to go to the mat on every single one of them. We are 2 months away from the heated rhetoric of the Trump campaign being like, we're going to shove every nominee down the Senate's throat. Well, clearly that's not happening. And I think as a result of that, the Democrats in particular don't have to do as much of a heavy lift as they did before. But you also have to realize that, you know what, there's probably going to be Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. There's probably going to be HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't know if there will be a Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. We do know there will not be Attorney General Matt Gaetz. That one was already decided a while ago. I think there will be a few that go down in flames. But it has cooled.
You really think so?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have so little trust in Senate Republicans to have any sort of backbone here, even in the worst of situations. And let's be clear, Tulsi Gabbard is the worst of situations. Kash Patel is the worst of situations. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the worst of situations. And Pete Hegseth is the worst of situations. These guys are all markedly unqualified or off the freaking reservation.
Yeah.
And I don't see how Senate Republicans stand up to anyone other than maybe Murkowski and Collins, who really don't matter in the scheme of things anyway. Like, are they actually going to? I mean, who's going to be the third?
You have to make. I mean, McConnell.
He's not going to stand up.
He's a lame duck. This is look at what Trump did. Lame ducks, as politicians, are also freed of their base. Now, if you know you're not going to be reelected, then despite the hullabaloo of Trump saying that he's going to be a dictator and he's going to violate the Constitution and all this and serve more terms. Look who said that, by the way, Steve Bannon. All right, Steve Bannon was pushing that recently. Oh, he's 100% going to be a dictator who sticks around and breaks the law and breaks the Constitution. Well, what's happening with Steve Bannon now? Bannon is getting iced out by Elon Musk.
And that's another brewing battle in MAGA world too, is that Musk versus the far right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't. But I think the question is: Are Dems going to do the resist thing? Right? Are they gonna throw all the? Are they going to throw the kitchen sink at Hegseth and Gabbard, et cetera?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that vigor that we saw 8 years ago.
Not going to, because it won't get enough attention, and you got to pick your battles. So no.
I cut you off. Sorry.
Oh,
but
it's okay. I'm used to it.
All right. So the politics of the wildfires in California, certainly they're going to be tied to disaster relief money, the future of Gavin Newsom politically, which certainly isn't helpful. I mean, there's been a ton of pushback on his reaction, his comments, getting chased down by a wannabe reporter on what he's been doing and why he, and Trump, of course, despises him. So Trump's taking shots at him. How do politics fall into the follow-up to the wildfires?
It's like every other natural disaster and the increasing severity of these natural disasters with climate change, climate crisis, however you want to coin it. I mean, in the partisan world, it's pretty predictable. What we're not seeing, though, is an awful lot of action. I in a weird way, honeymoons and whatnot, political honeymoons for new administrations usually go concurrently with those administrations taking office and not behaving as the administration when there's already a current administration in power. Trump and the Musk and whoever have been acting as though they're governing, talking as though they're governing already, but one of the big critiques you've seen out there is that he's not out there. He's not doing anything. He's still in Florida. All right. So he's just, word vomit on, which does nothing. And as I think we'll probably talk about a little bit with Dick Tofel from formerly of ProPublica. People are smart. It's not like there's no novelty around. I have faith.
Are they?
There's no novelty around Trump dumping on people. All right. That's not new. What would be new is him going out there and, climbing in a fire truck and spraying down some of these fires or flying Trump Force One over top and airdropping. I don't know. I mean, maybe he'd do bottled water over top of it. I don't know, but action. All right. That would be new.
But he's just going to fan the flames. That's all he does. I mean, literally, not literally, metaphorically fan the flames.
You know what? Literally fanning the flames, that would be action. That would be news.
I mean, he's going to hold this over California Democrats' heads, right? And Newsom, and he's going. He's already threatened to withhold disaster aid the first time around. And if he can take additional whacks at uber liberal LA, you better believe he's going to do it.
What's fascinating about that smelt thing they're talking about, the fish out there? Think back to the first Trump administration and the incredible power of California Republicans in this current Trump iteration, sort of a renewed power. They've been fighting over that stuff for years. All right. And what Trump is very good at is taking things which are kind of sitting out there in the ether of conservative media and pulling them down and being and this is why God did that to all those liberals. All right. And that's why the liberals are getting smited right now. That smelt issue, the fish and water resources, that is as old as, that's almost as old as LA itself. Okay. Just put Jack Nicholson in a fedora. All right. And
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other thing is, I think Kevin McCarthy was able to keep Trump off of some of those punishments, essentially, of California in the first administration. You don't have that backstop this time. You don't have a Californian with that ear. So Trump may be
McCarthy. You got to remember too, McCarthy and Devin Nunes came out of the same political shop many years ago. I believe it was Bill Thomas. And McCarthy was on board with that stuff too. And now Devin Nunes is still, Kash Patel, of course, who might be the next FBI director, is a longtime Devin Nunes person. They were on board with that. So these are old issues that have been pushed by that wing of the Republican Party for many years. Trump just has a way of rhetorically packaging it to turn it into a usually effective attack. Previously. Let's see how effective it is this time.
All right, one more. All right, so Trump continues to speak the value of tariffs and wants to increase tariffs on our trading partners, specifically Canada and Mexico, but also China, who, as a farm kid, buys more soybeans than anyone else in the world. But here we are. He's talking about using tariff revenue to pay for his tax increase or tax decrease, tax cut, or renewing the tax cut, which won't cover half of the bill. And they're not going to cut another $2.5 billion in spending because they don't have the guts to do it, first of all. And you can't do it without getting into entitlements or defense. How serious do you think we are? Are we really expecting these tariffs to get kicked into effect after Trump takes office?
There's still, a significant amount of diversion inside the Trump administration on these issues amongst the different economic types around him. The thing you have to wonder always, how much of this is leverage, all right? How much of it is just a threat versus will he actually do it? I think that's the way most people are approaching it right now. I mean, look, he still has midterms coming up. All right. We're already into the next round of elections. And I'm still pay $8.99 for 18 eggs. All right. Dozen and a half eggs. All right. The price just went back up. That election changed nothing. Why? Because it didn't have anything to do with the election. It's that friggin' bird flu. All right. But voters vote on that stuff. And if, your cell phone, whatnot, is all of a sudden more expensive, if my cost of Doritos is shooting through the roof and I ain't got no guacamole for them, all right, people vote on that stuff. I think he's part of being a populist is being sensitive to popular movement. So I don't think it's locked in, not by a stretch.
I hope people finally get the message that increased tariffs are paid by us, paid by consumers.
Yeah.
Because everything we buy off of Amazon will be more expensive. Everything we buy at Best Buy will be more expensive. Everything we buy at the grocery store that comes from Canada, comes from Mexico, will be more expensive. And I just don't know that the public gets it at this point.
Maybe you'll have Donald Trump sitting down by the fire wearing a cardigan, giving a very serious speech to the American public about how they need to adjust their expectations and start buying less.
That's not going to happen. All right, let's turn to Dick Tofel.
It's time to go in the huddle.
All right, we are honored to be joined by Dick Tofel, who is the founder of ProPublica, and now writes a Substack called Second Rough Draft. You should go read that because it's good stuff. Dick, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for taking time with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I want to start with the crossroads that the media is at, because we're in uncharted waters, at least in the last century, right? Of what the media is, what people are consuming, how people are consuming it, the political power that is exerting pressure on the media. What's your take on the status of maybe we'll call it the legacy media, the traditional media in the United States today?
Well, I think it's, first of all, I think to some extent its demise is overstated. I still think that a lot of our previously most influential news organizations are still our most influential news organizations, but there's no question that all the things that you cited are changing and changing fundamentally. The business has been under challenge for a quarter of a century now. In my view, advertising supported media is dying, and advertising in media, particularly news media, is continuing to fade. Alternative sources continue to rise. I think the creator economy is an increasingly important factor for news organizations. So a lot is up for grabs, and all of that was true before Donald Trump, and he obviously complicates and exacerbates a number of those things.
Dick, you wrote a piece recently regarding how journalists should cover the second Trump administration, which I love because you had some actionable items in there for us. And in particular, you wrote about, this is over at your Substack, Second Rough Draft, which everybody, if you haven't signed up for this yet, please do. It's incredibly useful for this time in particular. You wrote about that we need to pay attention to his actions, write more about his actions, not his words. If you're in a newsroom which lives off the clicks of his words, like he's like, I'm gonna go buy Canada, I'm gonna go annex Canada tomorrow. Maybe I'll send troops, maybe I won't. How do you do that? How do you achieve that balance for the places that do need the word, so to say?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think living off clicks is it may be a viable short-term strategy. I think it erodes things, including trust, and I think reader attention actually in the long run. And I think that's true as a general matter. To get back to Trump, I mean, look, the president of the United States asserts he's going to annex Canada. I guess you have to tell people that. But I wouldn't take it seriously. And if you wanted to take it seriously, which again, I don't recommend, let's take the Canadian thing as an example, for instance. I actually looked this up. Trump keeps talking about Canada as the 51st state. There are actually 40 million people in Canada. Canada is divided into 10 provinces. The average Canadian province has 4 million people, right? Simple math. If you look it up, the median American state has 4.5 million people. So if the United States and Canada were going to merge, you would expect that there would be 10 Canadian states, actually. And given that Canada is considerably to the left of the United States politically, the whole spectrum is to the left. I think you could expect that if Canada and the United States merged, about 16 of 20 Canadian senators would be Democrats and maybe 4 would be Republicans. So if you want to take that seriously in one article, lay out what I just said and say, okay, this is an interesting idea. We could merge the United States and Canada. Here's what it would look like. The United States would move very significantly to the left. The new United States Senate would be, roughly 63 Democrats and 57 Republicans. And Ontario would be the 4th largest state of the union. The smallest Canadian province would be larger than 9 American states. So you can write one article saying, here's that, and then move along. Or, as I say, honestly, I would recommend 0 articles.
And the moose population would go up significantly, way more.
But my
moose.
point is, if you're going to take this seriously, take it seriously.
I don't take it seriously, and I don't think anyone should. Yeah,
I don't either. If you're not going to take it seriously, then move along, right? The country has lots of serious problems, and we don't need to be discussing non-serious problems.
But the problem I see with the theory of, let's write about what he does instead of what he talks about is a thing like the mass deportations, right? Where he's talking up a big game. Holman's talking up a big game. But is the media then expected to not talk about it until agents are swarming into communities and sticking somebody's abuela in a van and sending them back to Mexico? I mean, it has to be, that's more than just words, because you have to talk about it before it happens at that point, right?
Well, do you have to talk about repeatedly? I mean, Trump has said there are going to be mass deportations. Everyone in the country knows that he said that. I don't think it is news when he says that again. I don't think it's news when Homan says that again. So I don't think you need to say, Trump said today for the 433rd time that there are going to be mass deportations. I do think the key to covering this starting next week, when he becomes president again, is, are there actually going to be, by historical standards, mass deportations? The president who deported the most people in our history is Obama. People do not think of Obama that way, but that's okay. That I think it establishes a historical baseline in numbers. Those numbers are all public. Only when Trump lays out and starts to implement a plan that shows him and starts to execute a plan that shows him actually deporting more people than Obama, could we say in any reasonable sense that he is engaging in, by some, mass deportations. If he, for instance, very noisily deported 50,000 convicted violent criminals, that is not historically mass deportation. This is a very large country. Mass deportation is in the multiple millions. And that's what they've said. They've said, we're going to deport 11 million people or 20 million people. Okay, that would be a very, very big story if they actually did it. But if they noisily deported 50,000 people and we've reported that as if it were deporting 2 million people, 50,000 is 1/40th of 2 million. And it is not good journalism to report it in such a way that people confuse something that is 40 times the size.
Yeah, it feels like we need, the same way that, in our YouTube podcast here, we use StreamYard for this. We have a number of video elements, which plug and play automatically. It feels like we need some nut graphs that plug and play automatically. God knows I can think of probably at least a dozen editors over the years who have beat me over the head with, like, Tom, you don't have a nut graph anywhere to be found in this thing. Feels like America needs a nut graph.
Well, and maybe if you don't have a nut graph, Tom, you ought to spike the story.
Can you say that for non-print guys, please? I'm a broadcast guy.
So a nut graph is the paragraph of a story, usually pretty high up in a story, that says the significance of what we're talking about here today is this and that, and puts it in some perspective, and frequently has numbers like that we're talking about. Holman indicated last week, for instance, I thought that they did not have the resources and especially the appropriation to conduct true mass deportations. That's a story. That's a story that says, because it strongly suggested that until and unless they pass one of these reconciliation bills, that the guy who's been named to run this effort says it is not going to be what it was billed to be.
Wow. I saw this in 2020 when I was working at Business Insider and we were trying to create, well, we did create a Washington bureau, the first Washington bureau, and we lived off subscriptions. And we had an incredible number of increase in subscriptions through the 2020 election. But after January 6th, the numbers fell through the floor. And it does feel like our audience, news consumers, people are smart. They can see through, like you said before, like they know when we're just repeating the talking points, right? We're in, like, Trump said these things 1,000 times, what they don't know, and I didn't know that until you just said it, which is incredibly fascinating, is okay, the actual man tasked with carrying this out says we don't have the resources to do it. That's interesting. That's new. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, I think if you look at this issue, it's not that big a surprise, and it's one of the reasons that they're now discussing having a budget reconciliation bill before the tax bill, because no matter what they tell you, the tax bill is going to take many months. It is a really complicated matter. And the other thing is, as you all probably know, the Republican majority in the House, assuming that the president's nominees are confirmed, is going to be reduced to one for probably some of February and almost all of March and April.
Yeah.
And the chances that they are going to be able to bring a tax bill to the floor with a one vote majority, I'm not sure they'll be able to bring any reconciliation bill to the floor, but they certainly won't be able to bring a tax bill to the floor, I think, before May, for that simple reason.
Dick, one of the things that's frustrated me as someone who's been in media, currently host a broadcast show, write a newsletter as well, is just the capitulation that we've seen from traditional media sources to the Trump campaign and now the impending Trump administration. Everything from the Post and the LA Times spiking their editorials, their editorial endorsements, to ABC, settling this lawsuit where they essentially gave a big chunk of money to the Trump inauguration. It seems as if we're seeing, maybe this is unfair to the journalists who do the really hard work, but we're seeing the backbone of the traditional media just go away. And I fear that we're well past the days of Ben Bradley and Katharine Graham standing up to Nixon, and we're just going to see media give in whenever pressed. What's your take on the situation, and are you as concerned about it as I am?
I think that honestly that's a bit overstated, and I think it lumps in things that belong together with things that don't. So let's take those. At one extreme, there's the behavior of the publisher of the Los Angeles Times, who I think is behaving exactly the way you describe, which is upsetting and concerning, and particularly if you are either on the staff of the Los Angeles Times or depend on the Los Angeles Times for a lot of your news and any important measure of your opinion journalism. On the other hand, the ABC settlement, I think, is quite likely, and I wrote about this in the Columbia Journalism Review, I think it's quite likely a completely different thing. ABC has not answered questions about this. And, I spent probably 20 years of my life practicing press law as at least part of the time. My strong hunch is that ABC settled that case because there is evidence that they know about, and perhaps that Trump's team knows about, that undermined their case in a fairly significant way, which is easy to imagine. It would be, for instance, a note from a producer to George Stephanopoulos that said, look, George, it's complicated about the use of the word rape in the Jean Carroll case, but technically you should not use that word in this segment. Now, we could have a long discussion about that and whether that's true or not, but if a producer wrote that, that would put the whole case in great jeopardy. And that might have happened. And that would explain what they did. At the Washington Post, I think, for instance, that the editorial endorsement was just very poorly handled, but probably not quite what it appears to be before the election. On the other hand, this Melania Trump documentary, which essentially amounts to Jeff Bezos paying Mrs. Trump millions of dollars personally, I think that is what it appears to be. But that's more about Amazon. And I think the question that it raises is Jeff Bezos still a viable owner of the Washington Post? And is he interested in continuing to be an owner of the Washington Post? And my hunch is that the answer to both those questions is no.
Well, maybe you have some insight on this. I mean, of course, I'm a huge fan, and I repeat this routinely, that everybody should, to understand this moment in American politics, I think it's almost more instructive to read Kara Swisher's Burn book about the rise of the tech titans who we have in play now, almost more than a traditional political book. Do you have any indication, number one, and I'll do a follow-up here on the Post, do you have any indication that this effort to buy the Post that she's putting together, is that real? Do you think Bezos would let that go? Because it seemingly it would create fewer problems for a mega government contractor like Bezos.
I have no special knowledge of this, first of all, at all. I know Kara pretty well. We used to be colleagues. I think I would regard us as friends. I would be very surprised if she ended up as the owner of the Washington Post or part of an ownership group. I would be very unsurprised if Jeff Bezos decided to sell the Washington Post at some point in the relatively near term. And I think the likelier buyers are like Axel Springer, Bloomberg, or possibly a billionaire like Mark Cuban, or even Mark Benioff if he hasn't felt too burned by his ownership of Time magazine.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, totally. Time's taken an interesting turn too in some ways with Benioff buttering up Trump. Do I wonder with the Post, and I saw that a Playbook has this now too. Jack Blanchard's going to be the new managing editor / head of Playbook. Why do we have all these Brits coming in and taking over United States media properties? It's like the second British invasion here, or third, I guess. Whatever.
Well, other than in the Murdoch empire, I'm not sure we do, right? I mean, that was briefly advanced at the Post and quickly retreated from. Mark Thompson had a key job at the New York Times and now has one at CNN. But other than the Murdoch empire, I think that this is overstated in generally.
Has that I think about Axel Springer as well, because Axel Springer brought me, obviously not British, but European, bought Business Insider and Politico.
Well, that's international ownership. I mean, that's a different question, right?
Yeah.
In an economy as globalized as this one, I actually think that the ownership of the key press outlets in the United States is more heavily rooted in domestic companies than you might expect, given how global the business is.
So this was to be expected. Yeah.
I think you've had a globalizing economy for a quarter of a century or more, 30 plus years. And, you don't see anything like the Japanese ownership of the Financial Times, for instance, in the United States.
Can we agree?
Murdoch obviously has a lot of holdings here, but I think Murdoch is still, is now principally an American, spends
Hmm.
most of his time, most of his energy on the United States. That's
Can-
less true of his son, and we'll see how the empire plays out uh, when the leadership passes to his son, if it does.
Hmm.
I think one of the overarching issues with media today is trust. Certainly the higher educated, college educated, higher income folks are more trustworthy of your quote unquote legacy media. But I think as we've seen polling and we've seen focus groups of regular voters, especially middle income, lower income voters, middle of the road voters, certainly right leaning voters. There's a lot less trust in those institutions, and that's why they've turned to. It seems getting, you listen to these focus groups, and people get more news from TikTok and Joe Rogan than they do the CBS Evening News. Um, which
Well, I have to say, I think this is overstated. Um, and
Okay.
in the following way, I think trust in media is a lot like how people feel about the Congress. If you look at surveys of the Congress, no one likes the Congress, right? It polls in the single digits on its bad days and the teens sort of on its good days. On a great day, it gets up into the 20s, below where presidents have ever been, right? So no, basically nobody likes the Congress, but almost everybody likes their congressman. How do we know that? Because the overwhelming majority of members of Congress get reelected every single time. If the wind is blowing to the right, if the wind is blowing to the left, if it's closely divided, the one through line is the overwhelming majority get reelected. And I think that trust in the press, yes, if you ask people who don't read the New York Times if they trust the New York Times, the answer is many of them don't. Most of them don't.
But people
If
vote
you
with their
ask
feet
people, if
here. Don't people vote with their feet on this? I mean, look at the
well,
network
wait,
ratings,
wait,
look at
wait,
the
wait.
newspaper circulation. Nobody's going back to them because they don't see them as a viable resource anymore.
I just think that doesn't line up with the facts. I think two things are true, right? One, people trust the news organizations they choose to consume, um, which is not a big surprise. Two, the largest news organizations, the New York Times, the Washington Post, for instance, have well, not the Washington Post because it's had a tough couple of years, but the New York Times has the largest audience basically that it's ever had, much larger than it had in the old days of legacy media. Um, the internet has enabled it to have a much larger audience. And if you look at, there was a survey by Matt Baum at the Shorenstein Center last year, very large survey, very detailed, that asked people who voted how they got the information on which they based their vote. And the answer was number one, local TV news. Number two, friends and family, which I think is almost certainly a proxy for news organizations. And not surprising, right? A lot of people don't tune in closely to politics and they rely on their friends and family who do. So, and local TV news is still the most watched news in the United States and the most trusted. So I'm not saying that there isn't something going on here. There clearly is, as there is a decline in trust in all institutions. But I think the particular problems of the press in this respect are really overstated.
You think are there things that I
I
think
have
that
not, I have not convinced Patrick.
I
That's for sure.
vehemently disagree with you on that. I think that ratings and revenue and circulation and the way voters talk about them, and I'm not trying to
Yeah, but
dismiss
here's the
your
thing, right?
expertise here.
No, but
I'm
here's the
looking at
thing.
this as an observer.
Here's the thing. We are a country of 330 million people. The New York Times uh, now has the largest audience it has ever had, and it is consumed by well less than, on a regular basis, by well less than 1/10 of the American people, right? So its high watermark is less than 1/10. 90% of the American people have never consumed news from the New York Times on a regular basis. So if you go ask those 90% what they think of the New York Times, you can do that. And they may think less of it than they used to. But they weren't readers then, and they're not readers now. So that's my point, right? What do? They watch the local TV news. Now,
but
do
see,
they
and I
watch
live in the
little-
Chicago market, and TV ratings are at the lowest they've ever been for local news.
That's right, but they are still the largest source of news.
Sure.
Look, right? Half the people
And it's
don't
also
vote.
worse than it's ever been. The quality is worse than it's ever been too.
We can have a discussion about that, but I think it's a separate one.
Sure.
Half the people don't vote. The question is, where do people get their news from, and who do they trust? And I think that most people trust the people they choose to get their news from. And I do think there's this disjunction. I think it would be useful for you to think about this congressional analogy, which is surely true, right? No one likes, how do we explain living in a country where no one likes the Congress and all the members get reelected?
Gerrymandering is how you explain that. But
well,
I live in
why
Illinois, which is the most gerrymandered joint in the country.
Well,
so that's
But why? Wait. That explains why everybody gets reelected.
sure.
But if everybody likes their congressman, why do they not like the Congress?
Well, because if you look at Illinois' 15th congressional district, which is a carved up, let's stick every downstate Republican we can so that we can shove as many Democratic members in the suburbs, that you've got a 90% approval rating for Donald Trump. So they're going to love their full-on MAGA red hat wearing congresswoman, and they're going to hate Congress at large because they are as an institution anti-Trump, too liberal, to Washington, to et cetera. So it mimics the gerrymandering of that group of people.
The outcomes, right? Of course, the center of gravity politically is pretty close to the midpoint between the two parties because the country is so closely split. And the outcomes from the Congress are also pretty close to the center of gravity between the two parties for the same reason. I just think it's not as simple as people make it out to be.
There seems to be a divide between the, quote unquote, the faceless institution versus the face, versus the personal interaction. Anecdotally, I've come across this where, I've been covering Republicans for a long time, and, on the right, and generally speaking, Republicans more than Democrats are broadly hated the media, as some, amorphous concept, going back to, Reagan and even before then. I actually found a book at the Baltimore's Free Cycling Library, the Free Library, written in the 60s, called The Fading American Newspaper, all about how the American newspaper was dead because it was too liberal. This was written in 1964. So this has been a heuristic on the right for forever.
I just also think, I hate the media and I love Joe Rogan. Well, what is Joe Rogan?
Right. Yeah.
But he's not what we would consider media, right? He's not a journalist. He's not a columnist. He's an interviewer.
I mean, he is 100% in my view in the media business, right? I do think the rise of the creator economy is a very real thing here. But I think what it is
says three guys on Substack.
It's a sign of fragmentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And people are finding creators who they relate to. So the trust issue is a real issue. And I don't mean to minimize that at all. But I think it is a broad societal problem. The Supreme Court, for instance, has the lowest ratings it has ever had by a long shot.
That's right.
Now, that's not a problem about the press. I think it is actually a problem about the court itself. So I just I think these, as I say, I think these things are more complicated and more interrelated than we sometimes like to pretend.
We're going to leave it at that. Dick Tofel, the founder of ProPublica, and now writes the Substack, dicktofel.substack.com. You can go find him there, subscribe, read his great stuff called Second Rough Draft. Mr. Tofel, a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Good to
Dick.
see you.
It's time for the second half.
All right, Dick Tofel is an incredibly thoughtful and decent guy, even though I disagree with him on some stuff. I think he sees the world from the importance of the institutional media, and I see it from sort of the withdrawal of the institutional media from American society. And I think we've got two different perspectives on that. But I think it's certainly a worthy conversation.
It was important context. A really, really helpful context for where we are.
All right, Q&A. Send us a note. Drop us comments on YouTube, or send us a tweet at ground_game_pod. We'll throw your questions in here as we get them. First one, Tom is the arbiter of all thing on the Pences. Let me pull up the photo. I don't have the video, but I have the photo of Mike Pence shaking Donald Trump's hand at the Jimmy Carter funeral. In that moment, it was probably not discussed that Donald Trump wanted his followers to hang Mike Pence.
Right.
But you can tell who noticed that Donald Trump wanted his supporters to hang Mike Pence, and that is Karen Pence.
Yes.
Who, if you're watching on the YouTube, you can see behind Mike Pence, sitting there ignoring Donald Trump.
Yeah.
In the ultimate Karen move. The best Karen move of all time. You go, girl. Break that down for us.
That was incredible. Just a couple seconds after that, too, Melania walks over and outstretches her hand to Karen Pence, and Karen Pence doesn't do a thing. I mean, look,
that's vindictive, man. I love it. I love it.
You know what? They set the terms of this thing, right? It's like Trump and Melania Trump said, all right, it's time for trial by combat. And then they're shocked when everybody else behaves as though it's time for trial by combat. And also, I should note, pretty tame, too, refusing to shake a hand as opposed to, what a normal human being might do, which would be to get up and scream F you and, maybe sock him in the face after almost getting him murdered. That might be a pretty standard human response. Look, Pence does the very, very typical that relationship too. Mike Pence himself, he did an interview with Russell Moore in Christianity Today, where he talked about it, and the words exchanged were like, it's like, good to see you, Mr. President. Congratulations on your victory. Okay. And then sat back down. I mean, like, that's exactly what you would expect from the 45th vice president, or whatever, the former vice president. Karen Pence has always been the one to wield the knife in that relationship. And boy, did she. That was astounding.
I'd love for her to talk sometime.
It'd be incredible.
To do a sit down with the Times or
us.
Somebody. Well, that's probably not likely to happen, but but man, it's
Garrett, she's got some stories, man.
No, you think Kara Brooks is listening? Kara, give us a call.
Kara,
we want to talk to
what's
Kara.
Up? You know what, man? I'll tell you that she was, if you think back to January 6th, and that was quite a week because that was the 4th anniversary of January 6th, the first certification since the January 6th insurrection. When they were in that Senate office and the Secret Service was trying to get them out of there, Charlotte, the middle daughter, the author, was there.
Youngest daughter.
Yeah. What's that?
Youngest daughter.
No, Charlotte's the middle. Charlotte's second. She's a middle child.
Okay.
All right. Audrey's youngest. I will stake one book contract on that bet.
Understood.
And Greg was in there. All right. And what did Karen do while they're trying to figure out what they're going to do? Secret Service is like, sir, we need to move you to a secure location. And Pence is doing his serious thing. Like, no, I won't leave this battle station. Karen's closing the drapes on the windows so the insurrectionists can't see inside. It was real. And why would you ever forgive somebody for that? Trump, depending on how, what you perceive of his actions, was either catatonic, all right, as the ketchup dripped down the wall in the dining room, all right, or joyful and vindictive, saying things like, well, Mike deserved it for not overthrowing the election.
F that guy. F that guy.
Yeah. The incredible lack of humanity.
All right, last one on our Q&A. You both have been around the block a few times. Any tips for attending an inauguration?
Layers, lots of layers. Get those the gloves with the tips on them so you can work your iPhone. Make sure you got a good otter case on there so that it doesn't crack when you drop it, which invariably will happen. Although the cold is good for electronics, so that's good. I don't think there's going to be any attacks or anything down there. Capitol's heavily guarded this time. Maybe put on your MAGA armband. All right, prove your fealty.
My tip is very simple: don't go.
There's gonna be a lot of that too.
Too many people. Too cold. No, thank you.
A lot of people will not be there.
All right, that's going to do it for the show today. Thanks to Dick Tofel from formerly ProPublica, now writes his own Substack, dicktofel.substack.com. Thanks to you, Tommy, for taking time. Find us on YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment, do all those things to help us with the algorithm. We're on Twitter, we're on Blue Sky, we're on all those places, and on your favorite podcast app too. So please subscribe. Let us know what you think. Rate us on Apple, all that stuff, and let us know what you think, because we're open to criticism. Tom's more open to criticism than I am because I'm a jerk. But that's not
good. I've been covering Trump for 10 years. I go to these rallies, I get these love looks from the attendees. They're like, well, how much can I Venmo you?
Fake news. Fake news.
Hey, it turned into a rallying cry. But really though, I do live down in the comments against the better advice and judgment of most normal people. I do reply there. I'll tell you, if there's anything you'd like to hear from us, if you think we ought to be, I do go back to Twitter every now and then, even though I dumped that place. And I'll tell you, the stuff people are talking about that is on there is crazy. These like snake people, NAGA. Have you heard about this? It's insano. All right. So
I'm spending very little time on social media. I'm holding a baby. I'm spending very little time on social media.
That's most normal people. So even if you want to talk about that, I saw this video with Lord Jamar of the Brand Nubians, famous hip hop group from the early 90s. It's kind of like De La Soul, like that era of hip hop. I'm
so white and rural, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'll tell you, man. Speaking of language, Patrick doesn't understand. This guy's talking about why we know the earth is flat. If you want us to talk about that, I'm not sure we're going to do a show on that, but you could drop it in the comments and I'll engage with you. I'll probably tell you the earth is not flat, and that was proved many years ago, centuries ago, with an apple. It fell from a tree. But I will engage. So we're here for you.
And I've gotten some criticism that we haven't had a lot of Trump supporters on, but we said in our very first episode that the rule was you have to believe that the sky is blue and the grass is green.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're not going to take people who deny truth. And are just completely off the reservation. There are a bunch of Trump supporters out there that I do like and I do talk to, and I have a bunch on the radio with me. But they also have to be people that understand that the world has truth and has lies, and the people who are out there doing these kind of interviews are not those people. Yeah. So we're open to those conversations with pro-Trump people. not going to deal with people who are living in fantasy land.
Yeah, absolutely. That is our raison d'etre.
All right, that's it for this show. Like, subscribe, comment on YouTube. Find us on your podcast app. We'll talk to you next time on the Ground Game Podcast.